Turning now to some other news, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been pressing the European Union to do more to support Ukraine nearly 3 years into the war with Russia. Joining an EU summit in Brussels, Zelenskyy said European security guarantees will not be enough to protect Ukraine without the backing of NATO and the United States under Donald Trump.
Air raid sirens as Russian drones attack Kyiv. Almost 3 years into the war, these skies are still far from safe, and Ukraine's president is still busy asking allies for more support and security guarantees. He struck a positive tone when asked how he felt about Trump taking office in January.
Welcome, Donald. What can I say?
But fears that Trump may push for a quick deal to end the war and force Kyiv to capitulate were the backdrop to all Zelenskyy's talks in Brussels. And he chose his words carefully.
Can you imagine, for example, we have ceasefire. Everybody happy, ceasefire, yes. And can you imagine that in 2 months Putin will come back? Who will lose? Everybody. We need to have real plan, strong position, and I very much count that we will have unity between United States, as I said, and European leaders.
Unity is often out of reach among those EU leaders. And even as Zelenskyy made his case, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, known for criticising Ukraine and cozying up to Russia, was busy promoting his own plan for a Christmas ceasefire, one which Kyiv says he has no mandate to make.
Just don't let thousands of young guys to die at Christmas time. That's so simple. And change the big quantity of numbers of war prisoners.
The EU's new foreign policy chief made her view clear.
Any push for negotiations too soon will actually be a bad deal for Ukraine. All the other actors in the world are carefully watching how we act in this case, and therefore we really need to be strong.
And faced with questions on which concessions Ukraine might have to make in the future, Germany stuck to its tried and tested lines.
I
think it's completely inappropriate that some are now discussing what should follow as a third and fourth step. We are now thinking about what will happen soon. For now, continued support for Ukraine is important here. A clear course, that there's no escalation of war, that it does not develop into a war between Russia and NATO.
This is likely the last time Zelenskyy will meet EU counterparts before the change of leadership in the White House. 2025 may well mark a turning point, and Zelenskyy's challenge is making sure Russia's war turns in Ukraine's favour.
And now DW Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra von Namen has been following Zelenskyy's remarks. Alexandra, what are your takeaways from this press conference?
Well, I thought that it was quite remarkable how straightforward President Zelenskyy was. He had a very clear message to the Europeans, stressing that what Ukraine needs right now are at least 19 air defense systems to protect its people and its energy infrastructure. Then he went on saying that Ukraine does need more weapons. And that was, of course, a clear hint at the Europeans that they are not delivering enough despite all their promises. He also spoke about a potential ceasefire. We just heard what he had to say about that. And he made clear that Putin, from his perspective, is not willing to have any negotiations. And then for Ukraine, even though they want to have peace in their country, it's important to have security guarantees from their partners. And of course, on top of their agenda is a membership in NATO. And he was also asked about Donald Trump in his press conference and about the emotions that he feels thinking about Donald Trump's return to the White House. And Zelenskyy was straightforward there too, saying that the only thing that he can say is welcome Donald, because he believes that Trump is a strong man and he wants him to be on Ukraine's side.
Now, Zelenskyy has asked for the EU to speak with one voice on the issue of Ukraine's security. How likely is that?
Well, I think that we really have to keep in mind that the Europeans have been able, since the beginning of Russia's war on Ukraine, to unify, to support Ukraine, despite the different positions across the bloc and despite Hungary trying to block financial and military aid for Ukraine. And of course, we also have to remember that there are states that have a border with Russia or Belarus, its partner countries, the Baltic states, for instance, or Poland, that regard themselves as frontline countries, and they feel threatened. They think that if Ukraine falls, they could be next. There are others in southern Europe, like Spain. They don't see this urgency. So far, they have remained more or less united. But of course, the longer the war continues, the more difficult it will be.
Now, what else is on the table there today in Brussels?
Well, the big topic here on the table is the EU's role in the world. And leaders will be speaking about that. They will discuss whether they will be able to have a common position, how to approach a second Trump presidency, how to react to potential tariffs, what to do with regard to Ukraine should Trump decide to reduce the US aid for Kiev. And they will also speak about the situation in Syria. They see the fall of the Assad regime as a historic chance for the country to be rebuilt and reunited. But of course, for that, they also need a common strategy on that. So those are the big topics on the agenda here.
Alexandra van Amen there, reporting from Brussels. Thank you very much, Alexandra.
Thank you.
Let's get across to our correspondent, Jack Perrick. He's been following that summit for us in Brussels. Jack, this will be the last summit before Donald Trump starts his second term as U.S. president. And it's not only his position on Ukraine that EU leaders are worried about, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, it's a really interesting one. That deadline of the 20th of January when he's inaugurated is really important. Firstly, in Ukraine, because of the issue that he says he wants to bring about the end of the war within 24 hours of taking office. That's what Donald Trump has said. And there's a suggestion that European peacekeeping forces, that's what the United States seems to be thinking of, that European peacekeepers would go into Ukraine to sort of retain some kind of peacekeeping force. Now, European leaders, the 26 of them, actually, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, isn't here, but the others are unlikely to really want to talk too much about what that will look like. If they mention that as an idea, then it could be seen as pushing the Ukrainians to the table to have talks. So that's a really, really big issue for the Europeans. They're trying to get on the same page, trying to understand what they're going to do when Trump comes into office. And not only on Ukraine, but also economically. Donald Trump has said that he wants to put tariffs on imports of products into the United States. During his campaign, he said that tariffs were his favorite word, and that so that means that the European leaders are going to have to look into exactly what that means, specifically the German car makers who export into the United States market.
Yeah, that will be top of mind for them, no doubt. Tell us a little bit more about what other issues are being addressed at this meeting.
Yeah, it's an interesting this one. Sometimes EU leaders, they come here to make decisions, and sometimes they come to knock heads and get an idea of what's going on. And that's why one of the topics is the EU in the world. And so they're looking at many different issues. Things like migration is also on the agenda here. We also have discussions. Since they met in October, we've had the Georgian elections, which has seen Georgia turn against its path into the European Union. Big issues in Moldova, and they're also going to be obviously talking about the situation in Syria. This is the first time that they're getting together since the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Damascus.
And what is the discussion like there? Have they been talking about the possibility of Syrian refugees returning home to their country? Are there any announcements we could expect on that?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get any announcements, but there's been some interesting things that have happened. The Austrians, for instance, have offered Syrian refugees living there €1,000 to return back to Syria. It's a complicated situation to be offering refugees back into a situation which is still quite unstable in Syria. One of the big things that the European Union sort of has to get its head around and decide is whether it will remove the designation for HTS, the new leadership in Syria, from a terror list. Actually, the EU doesn't designate it as a terrorist organisation. Well, it kind of does following the UN, but the UN still designates them as a terrorist organisation. So what will the European Union do on that? And that's where it comes to the leaders sort of getting together and having a decision. I don't think we'll get an announcement out of this summit, but they will start looking into exactly what they're going to do, how they're going to approach the Syrian leadership, the new Syrian leadership. We know that an EU envoy had some communication with them. We don't know how deep that went, but the European Union will have to have those discussions on the idea of refugees. There's over 1 million Syrian refugees in Germany, for instance, and some of them may want to be repatriated, some of them may want to stay. There are Syrian refugees all across the European Union, and so the EU leaders are probably going to want to find out what the others are doing, get on the same page, work out exactly what they're doing. We're hoping a little bit more information will come out soon.
Jack, thank you as always for your reporting. It's Jack Perrick in Brussels.